Greetings to everyone across Canada and indeed around the world. My name is Rick Dosen, Chairman, Entrepreneurial Leaders Organization. On behalf of our sponsors, supporting organizations, advisory team members, watch party hosts, and our event management team, welcome to the ELO National Forum 2021. The purpose of ELO, Entrepreneurial Leaders Organization, is to connect, equip, and celebrate Christian entrepreneurial and marketplace leaders. We want people to be more effective difference makers in their respective communities. In particular, we want people to have as much influence in a positive manner as they possibly can. Now what we'll do is we'll go in a few minutes to our first session, but before we do so, we have a couple of sponsors we'd like to introduce you to. The first is our gold sponsor, Nicola Wealth. We'll watch a short video.
The history of our firm is first a financial planning firm before we evolved to become an investment and asset management firm as well.
And when people said, well, that's pretty hard to do because nobody does that, I'm thinking, well, okay, but what if it wasn't hard to do? What if you could actually accomplish that? Let's give it a try.
How we treat clients, how we treat employees, and sharing the success. And those are sort of the three guiding principles, I think, that have helped us be successful.
We are proud of the fact we built a unique model. When we started, the model that we have today didn't exist.
At the beginning, there was 7 of us managing 80 million in assets. And now we have almost 200 people here managing over 6 billion of client assets.
What we're doing is a valued service. And at the same time, I'm assuming that there are ways to simply get better. In 10 years from now, I'm going to be surprised myself with what we might be doing. But it'll be something that when we get there, we'll say, oh, this is worthwhile. This was something I'm glad we added on.
I have with me Ron Hake from Nicola Wealth, who will provide a bit more detail on the firm. Ron,
good morning, Rick.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, so why don't you tell us a little bit about Nicola?
Thank you so much. As I watched that video, Rick, it referenced back in 2019, we were at 6 billion and about 200 employees. In the 2 years since, we've added about 5.5 billion. We're about 11.5 billion. We only manage investments for private clients, entrepreneurs, business owners, professionals, and so forth. That's a big differentiator of ours. I think one of the other things that's unique about our firm is the integrated planning we do. And that means that we're working alongside the entrepreneurs' advisors, like yourselves, their accountants, their lawyers, and trying to come out with best outcomes, mitigate that volatility, mitigate taxes, whether it's an individual pension plan, or today being Giving Tuesday, even integrating their private philanthropic giving into a private donation of some kind.
Right, Ron, one thing, because of course I work at Nicola Wealth also, so the one thing I think is so interesting is that Nicola in and of itself is an entrepreneurial firm that serves entrepreneurs. So maybe just give us a flavor as to how Nicola itself is entrepreneurial.
Thank you for that, Rick. I think the biggest difference is that as business owners ourselves, each one of us, including myself, are owners of Nicola Wealth. We sit alongside and work alongside in a collaborative approach with another advisor working on the client files and understanding the client's needs and objectives. But it goes beyond the traditional financial planning. It does look at tax planning. It looks at estate planning, insurance planning. It's really a holistic approach.
Right, right.
And once we put that in front of a client and we understand what their goals and objectives are, and then we execute on that.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ron. Ron Hake from Nicola Wealth. It's great that Nicola is a gold sponsor of this event. And if anyone wants to get a hold of Ron, they can find him on the Swap Card platform. Thanks a lot, Ron.
Thank you, Rick.
Great. Now we'll hear from our other gold sponsor, which is Stillwater M&A Advisors. And we have Doug Nix with us.
Hey, good morning, Rick. How are you?
Great. Hey, Doug. So why don't you just tell us a bit about your firm, also why you're part of this event and how it ties into the entrepreneurial spirit? Because you're a bit of an entrepreneur yourself.
Yes, I am. Well, I'll just give you a kind of a high level of who Stillwater is. We help our clients buy and sell mid-market companies in North America. So we're mergers and acquisitions advisors. Our clients are typically 15 million in revenue and up. And I started the business 20 years ago because I really saw that there was a great need for people to get really good quality advice when this happens. And we've seen so many stories where people have left millions and millions of dollars on the table when they sell their business. So that's a good part of that. Our goal, we have ambitious goals on being #1 in Canada based on a number of transactions. And we're trying to do that all based on a foundation of a strong relationship with Christ.
Well, and one thing I'd like to just maybe highlight for people that are likely not aware of is, so on the one hand, your firm is a leading M&A firm. At the same time, you have something unique like a corporate chaplain. So maybe just touch briefly on how your values are tied into the way you do business.
Okay, I really appreciate it. Now, we probably don't have enough time here to talk about it fully, but I'm passionate about it. I don't want to live a bifurcated spiritual life where I'm one person on Sunday and another person during the week. And so the question I've been wrestling with for 20 years, how do I as a business guy walk in partnership with an all-knowing, all-present, all-powerful God who wants to talk to me about every aspect of my life, including my business? And so as I do that, do we get better strategy for our clients? Do we come with better protection for our clients, better ideas? Can we provide better service levels? How do you bring that into the day-to-day life where the supernatural becomes natural? And so that's, as I've experienced that in my life and in the life of our secular and faith-based clients, we see a dynamic happening there that gets me excited. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to say, how can we take that whole flavor of that and infuse it into our firm? And one of the things that I saw was in the churches today, pastoral care is quite often focused on triage and not formation and care and stuff. So I wanted to create an environment for our staff where they could have ongoing care and development of their spiritual life and their walk.
Well, that's great, Doug. We really appreciate you sponsoring the event and joining us. And for all of you listening, Doug is a great example of someone who is a marketplace leader wanting to integrate their faith into their actual business practice. So, and if you want to get a hold of Doug, you can find them on the platform and obviously at their website.
Thank you, Rick.
Thanks a lot, Doug. All right, so now we're going to move on to our first session. I'm excited to introduce Vijay Krishnan, lead pastor of a church called The Well, which is based in Toronto. Vijay will be presenting for approximately 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll have a 5-minute Q&A session. So again, as a reminder, please forward your questions via the Q&A box. We'll fit in as many questions as we can. And as I mentioned, if you'd like to speak with Vijay separately, you can message him via the SwapCard platform. Vijay will be speaking on lead is not a 4-letter word. And given that Vijay's a pastor, I'm sure it'll be perfectly fine hearing him talking about 4-letter words. Welcome, Vijay. Take it away.
Thanks, Rick. So good to be with all of you today. And yeah, I suppose that title is a bit provocative. And I think, yeah, just something I felt like I wanted to lean into today. I don't know necessarily everybody who's on the call, but in some shape or form, we are all leading. And you would know that that's true, not only sort of professionally, whatever you happen to be doing, but in the relationships and the influences that you have in your circles, in your friends, in your family, and the networks that you've created. And yet, I think I wanted to put my finger on the fact that I think lead, we might think, or it has become a 4-letter word. And here's why I say that. Leadership used to be a word with positive association. And maybe for many of you are like, hey, it still is. But I think in general, I would say, yeah, it always was. It was always considered a positive thing. A leader or leadership was something or someone people looked up to. That was it was synonymous with the word, with someone who's a leader is someone we look to, someone we look up to. something that was an unquestioned good. And by that, I mean something that we'd say, yeah, we can't live without. Everybody needs this. This is a good thing. If someone's leading, they're doing a good thing. If someone is a leader, they have, that's a wonderful calling or profession. It was an unquestioned good. And I would say something that everybody felt they needed in their lives personally as individuals. Do I have people in my life that I can look up to who are setting the pace for me in organizations, profit, not-for-profit, different kinds of circles, whether they were formal or not? That leadership was something that we would say, yeah, we need this. And yet it's not the case anymore. And here's, I want to put my finger on why and what I mean by that. There has been, I think, two dynamics. One is leadership deconstruction. The other is leadership destruction. And I know I'm bumming you out already a few minutes into today. Don't worry, it's going to get better. But when we talk about deconstruction, author David Bosch talked about the hierarchies. And when I use that word, I don't mean it in a negative sense. He said that in the medieval times, the hierarchies went like this: God, government, church, family, self, and then objects, plants, or animals. And the way he would describe these hierarchies is saying, this isn't just describing sort of power dynamics, in fact, not primarily about power dynamics, but simply the way the world worked, how people found themselves and understood themselves in the medieval world. That in a sense, God was the one who was the ultimate sort of sense of reality, the one from whom we anchored ourselves in. And even if you're listening today and you're not a person of faith, or maybe you used to be or whatever, you can understand this is not really commenting primarily on faith, but actually just on the way that the world is, or the way that it was. That God was sort of the anchor point, and then underneath that, government, state, and then church, and then family, the individuals as the self, finding, in a sense, their identity and their place in the world from family, from church, from government and God, and in a sense, ruling over or interacting with objects, plants, and animals. And he said for a number of reasons over a number of centuries, these things were eliminated. Certainly when it came to the Enlightenment movement, or Nietzsche himself saying God is dead, or the scientific revolution saying, no, God is not at the center of life, nature is, and we don't need God anymore. And then even though human progress, human potential, the Enlightenment movement, scientific revolution was promising this is where we're going to find reality in World War I, World War II, and then the wars that after that, slapping all of the idealism out of the face, in a sense, of the Enlightenment movement or human progress, and really people losing their sense of confidence in government. And states and heads of state, as people realizing we had the entire world thrust into war. I think they said during World War II, Europe and North America lost 10 million men between the ages of 18 and 26. Just an absolute gutting, and not just physically of human life, but cities and really people's sense of well-being. And with that, a sense of trust in leadership, in the people who are leading our countries and the people who are leading us into war or out of war or through it. And then, of course, with that, in the postmodern movement, the dismantling of the church as an institution, and really even the family and redefining what the family means, leaving primarily individuals to find their sense of meaning from objects, plants, and animals. And at this point, I'm not really making sort of a judgment on this. This is just what has been happening over the last few centuries, which is, as you can look at it, a deconstruction of our sense of security, stability, and well-being and trust in leaders. Very much, not much trust left. And we can say that, but let's be honest, they're not wrong, or we're not wrong. In fact, some of you in this room are maybe articulating some of the sentiments you've had. So yeah, I don't trust those institutions, those people, those individuals any longer. Because the track record of leadership in virtually every sphere, and whether it's faith, organizations, whether they're formal ones, public, private, new entities, decades old, multinationals, there is an ugly account of abuse, corruption, greed, pride, and selfishness. And I would say that that's not true of every leader, but it is true of every leadership sphere. And certainly myself as a faith leader, in these days, there's been a huge reckoning amongst leaders and faith communities where we see the history and the record of things that are still happening, but have been happening for decades, for centuries, of all of these misuses and abuses of power and structure. And so we can say, man, people are coming by this distrust honestly. Good leadership, if we can say this, seems to be the exception and not the rule. And I don't know about you, but as a leader, man, this has weighed on me a lot. It's one thing to go, oh, I'm insulated from that, or that was them, or that was us. It just doesn't feel like there are any more excuses. There's no last bastion of sphere of leadership on the planet that hasn't been affected by this. And personally, as a leader, it makes me start to go, man, like you can feel the distrust. And certainly from, I have kids who are teenagers, that generation, and for the millennial generation, a little bit older than them, Gen Z, which my kids are a part of, there is just a gross lack of mistrust, widespread, and we can understand they come by it honestly. What could we tell them to say, no, you should continue to trust your faith leaders, you should continue to trust your government, you should continue to trust your CEOs, your teachers, your principals? What data would they look at to say, yeah, that's a good thing? And maybe perhaps I'm being cynical, but I think there's a reality here that if we're not willing to face it, we're not in touch with what's really going on when the words leader or leadership are thrown out, and certainly at a forum like this. And so there's been a deconstruction of leadership, but also a destruction. If I can say this, we have industries, companies, and organizations, churches included, built with a trail of used up leaders behind them. That's you and I. In many ways, leadership, we wonder, is it a four-letter word? Not just because people don't have faith in leaders anymore, but we as leaders ourselves can look and say, man, is it possible to lead without the collateral damage in our bodies, minds, souls, and relationships? And I don't know where you're at, but maybe you're coming into today and your body has been feeling the effects of the leadership toll on you. You've actually been feeling it in your bodies, and some of you are having, chronic health issues or things that just seem to be breaking down, and it's just the grind of leadership. For others, we would say, man, our relationships have taken a toll. And even if not things we have actively done to hurt the relationships in our lives, just the sheer number of hours and the stress that goes into building the companies, building the businesses, doing the work of leadership, why does it so often seem to come at a cost to the relationships in our lives? And not just the relationships at home. I mean, we're well aware of sometimes that dichotomy between success in the workplace and failure at home. But even in the way that we lead, in the relationships that we have, how many of us can say, yeah, you know what, the leadership environment and the way we've been doing the work we're doing has actually fostered rich, dynamic relationships in the leadership environment? There's probably as many of us that could say yes as there are to say no, not at all. That's not been my experience. In fact, maybe you launched into the entrepreneurial world because you said, I'm done with that old way of leading because of the cost of leadership to my mind, my body, my soul, and my relationships. And so there's not just a leadership deconstruction and not just externally people saying, hey, we don't believe in this anymore. Us as leaders sometimes look and say, is this worth it? Why is this the case? Because I've given some reasons as to or what's happened, but why is it the case, and does it have to be? And there's a few things that and maybe there's lots of reasons, but I want to put my finger on three of them. One is a general mindset of valuing growth versus health. And by that, I mean, we live in the Western world. We live in capitalism, Adam Smith's, economic theory of the invisible hand that moves the world. More is the unquestioned goal. Everybody wants to have more growth. And the stock market requires it, but even if people who aren't tied to sort of the public driver of the business that they're in, we know we want to, and expectations, investors, everybody in our lives, ourselves included, say next year's got to be better than last year, the year-over-year comparisons. More is the unquestioned goal, which is a value of growth, but not so much health. You had a chance to read Pat Lencioni's kind of landmark book, which is sort of a summary of a number of things that he wrote over a few decades, The Advantage. He made the point about, he talks about health versus smarts. And he said, if we look at, and he's going to talk to leaders, if you read that book, this idea of health versus smarts, that smarts are the traditional things that we look at, the levers that we want to pull, the dials we want to turn, or whether that's hiring based on resume or whatever the numbers are on the performance metrics, versus something like health, which he said is actually measurable as well. Things like turnover, communication, trust, all of those things are actually measurable, but it's much harder to try to move the needle on health. Even though he said, and his language was that health is the multiplier of smarts. That in a sense, smarts are ubiquitous. Most companies don't fail because stupid people are leading them. Some of you are putting your hand, no, that's not true about the company I work for. But let's just say that for a moment. Smarts are ubiquitous. Most of us listening on this call have the ability and the capability, but the health is a multiplier of that. And if you're a math major, you know, if you have you're multiplying by a quotient less than 1, you are diminishing the value of what you have. Health is actually more important, and yet it's harder to measure. Health takes longer to grow, to move the needle on. And so we opt for growth and the short-term growth metrics. And in fact, the world we live in is, what have you done for me lately? What's this next quarter going to be like? We are often slaves to turning around results so much more quickly than health would actually require us to attend to. And the reality is this, and let's just be honest, health requires us as leaders to truly change. We can turn the dial on growth, but to actually see our companies and ourselves move in a healthy direction, it requires us as leaders to be healthy. And I'm going to define that a little bit more. We're not just talking about physical health. It's tied to us. The health measurement is tied to us as leaders. Speed of the leader, speed of the team. So that's one, value in growth versus health. The second is value in charisma versus character. And I'm just talking about the world that we're living in, the air we're breathing, the water we're swimming in, that like, does a fish really know it's wet kind of thing. This is just the world we're in. I'm not saying all of us agree with this, but this is hey, look, this is the air I'm breathing, whether it was when I was working, you know, in the business world or as a pastor. These are things that are true about all of us and where we're leading. Value in charisma versus character. Susan Cain, in her book, The Power of Quiet, she noted how post-industrial revolution, or during the industrial revolution, people moved away from the towns and villages and the businesses they were in. They were primary agriculturally based, primary family based. You worked with your family and your aunts and uncles in an extended family kind of way. You moved away from that into the cities where people didn't know you. They didn't know your family background. They didn't know where you'd come from. They didn't know your pedigree. They hadn't been around you for decades. And so you had to prove to them in a very short period of time that you were hireable, that you were valuable, that you were better than the next person. And so she said the emphasis when we moved that way was on external characteristics. What can you sell yourself on in the 5-minute interview? What can you portray yourself to be? And all of the external things became to be valued, in image and charisma and public speaking and all of those abilities, and less focus on what she would call the more introverted ones. And it's not about personality. It's just about where the emphasis shifted to less about the inside and what's going on in the mind and the heart, and more about who you appear to be. And she said, because of that, just less value on thinking and self-reflection. I mean, how many of us in our job descriptions, even when we started in companies where you had any kind of leadership role, was in the job description thinking? Or how many said to you, hey, how many hours have you spent this week actually thinking? All of the focus, again, because of the growth parameter, is doing. But she said even in the charisma and the external extroverted kind of context we're in, there's less focus on thinking and self-reflection. And actually, maybe some of us who are introverts found that really hard to lead when we were given no time to actually think. Which is actually also meaning when we look at the leadership crisis around us, without any self-reflection, we are too proud to think that that could happen to me. Right? Let's be honest. We've all looked at what other leaders have done with their wealth, with their opportunity, with their IPO, with their investors, or with their relationships in their family. And come on, sometimes we go, what an idiot. Why did she do that? Why did he make that decision? But that's foolish and proud for us to think that way, because nobody draws a line from where they are to a ditch and says, that's where I'm headed, right? Nobody thinks it'll happen to them. No one plans on chaos. No one plans on corruption. No one plans on cheating. No one plans on divorce. People don't get married for that. They don't start companies for that. They don't head out in that direction. And so it doesn't do to say that could never happen to me. And yet, when we are not reflecting on what's really going on the inside, in our mind, in our heart, in our relationships, it's quite possible we could be headed towards a ditch and we don't even know. And I think along with that, we're too insecure to invite feedback, to admit our deepest flaws and ask for help to change, right? If the external and who we appear to be is everything, and we're constantly having to prove ourselves in new environments, in new meetings, to new people, to new hires, to new investors, that keeps us away. Or subtly, that thing is, you can't admit your flaws. I think Lencioni even notes that thing, never let them see you sweat, was like an old deodorant commercial, but that's foolish. But we have been told vulnerability, admitting our flaws, even though everybody who works with us knows where our flaws are, we're so afraid to actually admit them. We're so afraid to actually invite honest feedback from people who will tell us the truth. Many of us have surrounded us with people who are warming their hands by our entrepreneurial fire, but they're not people who will actually tell us the truth about who we are and what's really going on. And then even more afraid to ask for help to change. When we're in a charisma-based culture and not a character-based culture, these things become very threatening to actually admit. So not just growth versus health, not just valuing charisma versus character, but also valuing things versus people. And this is a big one. I think the reality is this: we use people to get things instead of using things to bless people. I mean, friends, that, if we're honest, is what our capitalistic culture has come to be. We see people as people who can advance our careers or not, people who invest in us or not. We make value judgments on the way the world works based on what we think they can do for us. We use people to get things instead of using things to bless people. And this is maybe the most baseline truth or reality about the capitalistic culture we are in. And what this does is it allows for a false dichotomy between work and home because, listen, we think success has nothing to do with relationships. Many of us have lived, and this is changing, I know, but it's still so deeply embedded in us that we have lived in a context and a time where, because we are trying to get stuff done and we are trying to build companies and build things and market things, and we're not thinking primarily of our work in terms of relationships, it allows us for this false dichotomy to say, oh yeah, home and those are personal life issues, my relationships, and then there's my work, as if somehow my work has nothing, well, you know, work and home are intricately connected, but it's not just about work and home. It's about relationships. Even in the workplace, we have somehow created this false dichotomy between relationships and the work that we're trying to do. And Adam Grant says this: people are not your greatest asset, even though we say that in your company. They are your company. He said, how have we gotten to the point where we can talk about what we do separated from the people we do it with and with people we do it for? It is because we have valued things instead of people. And this has allowed us to make all kinds of decisions actually that end up directly or indirectly hurting or sacrificing people for the goal of the thing that we are trying to achieve or launch or create or innovate or build. Or that somehow we can even talk about building companies and building organizations that don't have anything to do with people. And this is where we're at. And I think it's why we are where we are. And these are just my kind of musings of 3 reasons. But there is a way forward. I told you I wasn't going to bum you out this entire talk. There is a way forward. And here are just a few things I want to share with you. And this isn't the sum total of all the wisdom on this, but this was just kind of what was on my heart as I prayed and prepared for this session. And certainly things that I'm trying to hold myself accountable and my team accountable. And when I work with the business leaders in our faith community and anybody's leading anything, this is the way forward we are trying to achieve. It's redefining success in a number of ways, I would say. First of all, beginning with who, not what. And just to say this, who am I called to serve? I just sat down with a leader in our faith community who's leaving kind of a very successful career, one of the biggest global consultants in the world. And we had this conversation about where she's going to go next for the next decade. She's in her mid-40s. And we had this conversation. What if she thought about the next 10 years, not in terms of what she's going to do, but who is she called to serve? Who are the groups of people in her life? And again, right, this immediately gets rid of the dichotomy between people and things and starts to say, hey, my whole life is actually about relationships. And we know this, right? I mean, how many times have we heard people talking about the end of their lives? What people surround their bedside with is not the stuff they accumulated, not the accolades they got or the plaques or the first check. They want to be surrounded by, or we measure the success of their lives by, are there people surrounding their bedside? Are these relationships they had invested in deeply and who people who love them? We know this is what success is. But I think it begins with seeing our work and seeing our sense of calling and seeing where we're going in terms of who, not what. Who am I called to serve? And then how am I going to serve them that way? Secondly, I think, just a holistic purpose of leadership, to actually begin to think about and three parameters. One, character. How am I growing my character? When I think about self-leadership, how is my character growing? The inner person, my integrity, the way that I think about things, the way that I see myself. Is who I am on the outside the same as who I am on the inside? It's about growing our character. When we think about ourselves. When we think about our work, we think not in terms of competence or success, but in terms of contribution. If I think about who I'm called to serve, not what I'm doing, then I'm going to think about my work in terms of contribution. What kind of contribution am I making to the people in the world, my investors, the people around me, and the people I work with, and the people that I work for and who work for me? And then lastly, how am I cultivating the relationships in my life? Seeing the work that I'm doing as cultivating relationships, not just working on my self-character, not just seeing what kind of contribution I'm having, but how am I cultivating the relationships in my life? And so that's just a few things I wanted to leave with you. I'm flying through this today. I know we got a lot of content, but
Hey, Vijay, that was absolutely excellent. And I need to remind everyone, this is why we have recordings of these sessions. This is why you can listen to this again, have more of it sink in. So that was great. We have a number of questions. We'll just be able to get to a few of them, but Vijay, let me throw them out at you. So one question relates to where do you get feedback from? Where do you think is a good place maybe to get feedback on your leadership style? You know, is it just above? Is it sideways? Is it below?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to constantly look at creative ways to get it. I think one of the things we forget as leaders is there is a power dynamic always in play. And the further up the chain you move, the less likely people are to tell you the truth. And that's just the reality. And so I think you need to have people outside your organization, your everyday life, who are close enough to you to tell you the truth. But you do need people inside, because they're the ones that see you the 40, 50, 60 hours a week. I think if you're married, your spouse is somebody, even if they don't, we make the mistake sometimes if our spouse is in another profession or not connected to the work we're doing. Oh, they don't see, they don't know. They know, they see the stuff, and who we are leaks for better or for worse. They can see patterns in our trends, in our leadership, in our eating habits, in our drinking habits, in our money habits, all of those things. And so I think formal and informal ways of asking for input is really important, and recognizing the more, quote, power you get. Someone said this, I was reading a book the other day about toxic leadership in church cultures, and they said there's actually physiologically the thing in your brain that allows you to mirror, that is to put yourself in the shoes of someone else. Mirroring is a key brain capacity for empathy. That part of your brain actually diminishes the more power you have physiologically, which means the more power you have, the less you are able to actually know and put yourself in the shoes of other people. That's scary, right? So that means you have to work harder at that. The longer you lead, the more you lead, and the more kind of prominence or influence or
Well, no, that's great. Well, we've got time for one more question, and I think it's a good note on which to end this session. How would you encourage people that leadership, effective leadership, is worth pursuing? It is worth the challenges, and we do need people who are prepared to step forward and lead.
Yeah, and I just want to commend you for anybody that's doing that. I mean, I think all of you are, and you're here because you want to grow in your leadership. I mean, I think leadership is just human behavior. It's the way the world works. It's never going to go away. I think there is a reckoning, a great reckoning that's coming to every sphere of leadership, saying, okay, we need leaders, but we need leaders who are going to lead in a different way. So the need for leadership is not changing. In fact, to me, it's greater than ever, but it's calling us as leaders to find a new way of doing it. And so just be encouraged, because, I think we know as leaders, and probably you're here in some way because somebody invested in you. You had a leader in your life who set the pace for you, set the bar for you, encouraged you, challenged you, loved you, told you the truth. And you wouldn't be here without that. And so if nothing else to say, there are other, and I would say younger leaders. We have so many people who need and are wanting people to invest in them. And, they're much more concerned in that with an individual conversation than you being up at the front of the room, kind of teaching on leadership. They want to be with you, want to have coffee with you, want to hang out with you, want you to pour your life into them. And I think there's a great opportunity for that.
Well, Vijay, thank you very much for your presentation. It was excellent. and people can find you on the platform and, of course, online. So thank you very much for your contribution. And also, we commend you for all the good work you're doing at your church. You came highly recommended by our friend Brad. So we really appreciate your participation and support.
Thanks, Rick. My pleasure.